Well, I've just gotten off doing some stuff with Larry Goldberg where we talked about drama. And I love drama. That's what I watch on television all the time. But if I really like drama, what I really like is mysterious drama.
Mm.
Cern Basher has promised me that today he's going to bring us some Tesla mysteries.
We have a mystery to solve, Randy. This is a big mystery. We need to figure this out.
Okay. All right. Well, I've been saying for a week now that I think that the world of Tesla, whether it's on X or on YouTube or wherever it is way more interesting than the dramas and mysteries I'm watching on television. So, so let's see, CERN, whether you can prove me right. I'm turning it over to you.
That sounds good. Yeah, so let's start there. Let's solve this mystery because this is kind of an important one. And we've kind of been dealing with this now for a few weeks,
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah.
right? So I'm not sure if you heard, but Tesla announced disastrous results for their Q1 deliveries,
True.
right? And the narrative is that the company is not growing anymore.
And
That this
Fred Lambert is always right.
very objective. Yes. Yeah, I picked a good headline here, didn't I? Yeah. So it's interesting because, there's been lots of reasons offered, and usually it's centered on, well, demand must be falling off a cliff.
Right.
Okay. So let's take a look at this and see if we can figure this out.
All right.
All right. First of all, we need to understand a little bit about these guys.
Oh,
Do you know what this is?
well, I could make a pretty good guess. I mean, you're always quizzing me. So I'll suggest that maybe that is a ship that carries automobiles.
That is correct.
Good.
There's a few names for these things. And this is technically a PCTC.
Ah,
Okay. Um, and another name for it is a RoRo. Roll on,
oh,
roll off,
oh,
or roll on, roll. Yeah, I guess that's right.
on roll off.
Anyway, yeah. These are big ships that carry a lot of cars,
Yeah.
and trucks and other wheeled equipment. They can carry, 6, 7, 8, 9,000 vehicles at a time.
Wow.
So this relates to our mystery.
Okay.
But just here's another image of kind of inside. So they're made up of all these layers, all these decks where
Yeah.
the trucks and everything are stored
Yeah.
for its travel across the ocean.
And look at all the cars outside. Holy mackerel.
Yeah, and those must all be Teslas. I don't know
Of
why
course.
there
Of
would be
course.
anything else. But yeah. So this is interesting. So AJ on X,
Hmm.
his handle there is at the top. So, Tesla's Q1 deliveries decreased 20% quarter on quarter. So he's saying, okay, we've got some seasonality, right?
Right.
Q1 is always the weakest quarter for any large automaker. It's wintertime. There's usually a pretty big slump from
Right.
Q4 to Q1. So that explains some of it, right?
Yes.
Number two is product transition. In the US, we had weaker sales because of an early ramp of the new Model 3,
Which didn't go well.
which didn't go well,
Right.
right? So that further hurt in terms of supply of Model 3s. People wanted them, people couldn't get them.
Right.
So that hurts a little bit in the US. And that was kind of expected or developed throughout the quarter. And then we had this whole thing of, reduced shipping capacity because of the Houthi attack in the Red Sea, and forced ships to go a longer route, around the Cape.
Yes.
And so we knew that, that became clear during the quarter. And so what ended up happening was, Tesla produced 433,000 vehicles and they only delivered 386,000. So AJ's asking, why would they do that? Why wouldn't they throttle production?
Hmm.
Right? This doesn't make sense. If it was a demand problem, then throttle production.
Right.
No sense making too many vehicles. Okay. So he has they had a pretty good track record of estimating deliveries and so on over time. And he estimates now that about 46,000 vehicles sat at the end of Q1 somewhere on a ship, a port, a train, or just arrived at a delivery center. And he's saying that Tesla's strong Q1 performance in Europe and China, which were actually ahead of his estimates, are proof.
All right.
And he says it's also interesting to note that BYD, which famously ordered several of these car-carrying ships, right? And he's saying, why would they do that?
Mm-hmm.
They too had a shipping crunch in Q1, and they saw a massive decline in deliveries in Q1, much bigger than Tesla's.
Right.
So as you dig into this, it's kind of interesting. So anyway, here's a summary of AJ's analysis that he did on his own work. So he had an expectation in Europe of a certain number of vehicles, and actually Tesla delivered almost 7,000 more than he expected.
Mm-hmm.
After digging through all the data that's now finally been made available, the data that he looks at. And in China, they delivered 8,000 more vehicles than he expected.
Right.
So those were positive. In the US, it was about 6,500 worse than he expected. So overall, then there was a difference of about 38,000 vehicles that were worse than expected. And that is the rest of the world, deliveries to all the other countries of the world outside of Europe, China, and the US.
Right. And even some of the European countries that won't report until tomorrow.
That apparently came in last
Oh,
night. So
okay.
this is including that.
I see. Okay.
This is hot off the press information.
Wow. This is hot. Okay.
Yeah, apparently arrived a day early. So AJ was able to finish his analysis.
I saw that he had a more thorough analysis this morning. I didn't have time to really dig into it. Thank you for doing so.
This is it right here, hot off the press.
Okay.
Even though there are no printing presses anymore. This is still a good term. So his expectation for deliveries in the rest of the world was 48,000.
Right.
And according to the information now he's looking at, it was just under 10.
Yeah.
So, the difference of 38, 39,000 was that. And if you think about it, how do those vehicles get to Australia, New Zealand, Chile, Japan? Well, they go on ships.
Right.
So it's interesting then as we dig into this a little further. So this is an article, the source is at the top there in blue. Orders flood in for car carriers as vehicle demand outstrips capacity.
Mm-hmm.
Strong demand. That's counter to the narrative that's out there. Okay. So I'll just read some of this just to make sure we don't miss some key points here. The new year has seen a flood of orders for new car carrier vessels. Some from motor manufacturers opting to order their own ships and try to shift the logjam in automotive supply chains. One expert explained the industry was experiencing major congestion from a shortage of truck drivers. Hold that thought, we'll come back to that in a second.
Okay.
And equipment such as low loaders and not enough vehicle capacity to meet increasing demand, boosted by requirements for more electric vehicles. So this goes on, and I'll just skip to the next screen. The lack of truck drivers. So in Europe, there's an estimated driver shortage of 400,000 truck drivers.
Wow.
So even if the cars arrived in port, they could be delayed there, waiting for trucks to move them to the delivery center.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So that's definitely an issue, and I don't know how quickly this will be resolved. But also in terms of back to the ships, so BYD, they've placed 2 orders for 2 7,000 unit pure car and truck carriers. That's the PCTC,
Mm-hmm.
which is a type of Roro.
Okay.
Yeah. There are Roros that are not pure
Yes.
car and truck. There's pure car carriers, so PCC.
I see. Yeah.
And then there's some that are combination containers and cars. So there's all kinds of different Roros. There's a whole lingo here, Randy, that goes with this industry. Anyway, BYD may order up to 8 of these vessels. And they cost, 90 to 100 million a piece.
I see.
So big investment in logistics and shipping.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, just further data points. orders for these PCTCs are flooding into shipyards, right? So this one company ordered two 8,600 unit ships, following an order in February for five, and then four, and then one,
Mm.
to Hyundai. SAIC has reportedly ordered a dozen 9,000 unit car carriers costing 100 million apiece.
For those who don't know who SAIC is, they are maybe at this point the second largest manufacturer of cars in China. They make a lot of private label cars and cars for their own domestic market. I think I just read yesterday that BYD has passed them and is now the largest overall car maker in China.
Yep. And two of their competitors in the next paragraph, they're JAC Motors and Chery. They've gone a step further and established their own shipping company.
Wow.
So these Chinese car companies are serious about getting their vehicles shipped around the world, and they're making sure that they can do it by building their own capacity.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. There's a Ro-Ro operator, Grimaldi, I believe it's an Italian company. They now have 15 of these PCTCs on order. And it's a part of a $2.5 billion fleet renewal project involving 25 new rebuilds.
Wow.
Okay. So this is all this background in terms of what's happening.
Right.
So according to AJ, this is the reason. It's not a demand problem.
Right.
It's the lack of capacity in the industry, and exacerbated by the issue in the Red Sea and the ships then having to take a longer route, and then further reducing capacity because they weren't available when they were expected to be available.
Right.
So Q2 should be a lot better as far as deliveries.
Yeah. So I mean, this is the thing that I keep not seeing in these stories. So I'm glad that you're bringing it up. Is if you have 38,000 hanging out there that should have been delivered, then that 38,000 is delivered in the first couple of weeks. Then that should mean that quarter two, which most people would have liked to have seen be around 500,000, might be well over 500,000 if there isn't a demand problem.
That's correct. That's possible. And it also remains to be seen what kind of shipping issues we might have that linger and persist at the end of this quarter.
Of course.
So there's all that too. But yeah, it's probably not consistent with the narrative of a massive demand problem.
Right.
Particularly since also it was not just Tesla. BYD seemed to suffer from even a bigger issue potentially. So anyway, I thought that was interesting. That's, it's this relatively new information coming out, counter to the narrative out there.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Good.
Okay. You may have heard of this little bit of news from last week. Full self-driving is now $99 a month.
Right.
Supervised.
Supervised. Yes. Yes.
And I'm not taking a victory lap here, but I would say that back in January, I suggested to Elon that they cut the price of FSD and put it in more hands, save more lives. And turns out Elon listened to me.
There you go.
Among all the other voices that were saying this, he listened to me. Yeah. So anyway,
but you got it right. You got it right.
Got it right.
Take it when you can.
Yeah. That's right. So anyway, this is a good thing, makes these vehicles safer, more people adopting it. It's fantastic. Okay, this is another just quick thing. I actually wrote this today. A hearing from a lot of people that they, say the Tesla's broken stock. And they're going to stay out of the stock until it's not broken anymore. And I just wanted to point out that every other company under the sun also had a broken stock at some point. And I gave a few examples.
You could have gone a step further. This morning, NVIDIA is down 10% from its.
There you go. It's a broken stock.
Yeah, broken stock.
Yeah. Yeah. And not so long ago, Microsoft was broken stock for 14 years.
That's right. That's right.
Right. So that was a long time. So if Tesla investors think they've suffered, they have not suffered yet. Another decade to go.
That's right. That's right.
Anyway, my point with this was a broken stock, whatever that means, doesn't mean the company is broken. It's more associated with a negative narrative. And the thing about narratives those are stories that we simply tell ourselves to
Mhm.
explain things that we don't really understand,
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah.
right?
Right.
And narratives can quickly change based on new information, and they do all the time.
Yeah, and you know, this channel, we're really careful. We talk about narrative all the time, commonly, and I think, like you, a couple of times I've been uh, leading, bleeding edge on what when the narrative has changed. It's something I pay a lot of attention to, but it doesn't change the fundamentals. And the fundamentals right now are not lined up in Tesla's favor in terms of either PE or interest rates, both of which impact the current stock price in terms of how you value a company. So you have two things that you look at in valuing a company: forward earnings, which gives you a multiple, and the second thing is interest rates, which give you the discount to present value. Both of those things are working against the stock right now. When those two things turn around, if we start to see the future earnings looking like it's going to be increasing at a more rapid rate again, and or if interest rates come down, the stock will go up just automatically.
Yeah, and along with the rest of the stocks in the stock market, that kind of influences them sort of equally in that sense. Yeah, the only thing I would add to that, I agree with all that. The only thing I would add is there can be company specific information that materially changes things for any company, for better or for worse.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that can change things for sure. Um, Last week we talked about Uber,
Yeah.
and you asked me a question about, how much money has Uber made
Yeah.
over its lifetime. And I don't know if you would want to hazard a guess, Randy, but I've dug into that information. Actually, again, thanks to AJ. I'm outsourcing my research to him at this point.
I see. Okay, good.
Yeah.
We've been
Um,
mentioning AJ a lot on the chat
yeah.
as well.
It's great when I have another guy out there that's doing all the work for
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
It's fantastic. Anyway, here's the chart.
Okay.
Uber has lost a cumulative deficit of $31 billion dollars.
Total of 31 billion.
And that represents the total net losses the company has accumulated since inception on the balance sheet. It's the opposite of retained earnings.
Yeah.
It's the unretained non-earnings.
So only last year did they actually, no, they made a profit back in 2018,
Looks like there might have been a little bit of a profit there. Yep.
2018, and then a profit last year. So only 2 years of profit after being in business for 14 years, 15 years.
Yeah.
Okay.
Since inception, Q1
Right.
2000.
All right. Interesting. Very.
So AJ is wondering out loud whether there are any other companies anybody can think of with a larger accumulated deficit.
And did you check on that?
Haven't had time yet. This
Okay.
is hot off the presses again.
I got it. Okay. All right.
Yeah. So that's an interesting thing to think about. Are there any other companies? Rivian, I believe right now maybe is down about 19 billion.
Okay.
So they may be catching up fast here.
And Uber's current market valuation, I think, is 160 billion,
150, I think, right now.
150 billion right
That
now.
range.
And yeah, so with 31 billion in accumulated deficits. All right. Okay.
So um yeah. So anyway, that was interesting. Let's shift over to AI. And this is a little cartoon. The girl's in bed and her dad, I guess, is going to read a story. And she says, please tell me a story about a puppy who goes to Jupiter on her birthday to solve a mystery and is a mermaid using an engaging and humorous tone in approximately 1,000 words in the style of Ernest Hemingway. So bedtime stories are different now, Randy.
Well, yeah, not only are bedtime stories different, but I had to immediately laugh at this guy. He's going to be reading to her, whatever it is, it's going to be read off his laptop, not out of a book. And
Right.
and my youngest is 28 right now. Yeah, 28. And so 25 years ago, I'm afraid I was still reading out of big old cardboard back books. So
Times have changed, Randy. It's all
times have
AI stories
changed.
now.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So that, and eventually it'll just be the humanoid bots telling the story. So you can
Right,
cut out the
right,
parents completely.
right. That's right.
But anyway, this was kind of an interesting chart that showed how the AI models are improving every year.
Hmm.
And so if we start on the left with the green line, image classification. So AI models, they're working on getting them to classify images and getting them to improve.
Right.
You can see the human baseline across about, in 2014, 2015, they were as good as a human
I see. Yeah.
at classifying images.
Wow.
And that has shown gradual, consistent improvement over time. And then we have visual reasoning coming in with the blue line, and that made a faster improvement. And then medium level reading comprehension made a very quick improvement to faster than a human, or, you know,
Right.
more capable than a human, I guess. Um, and some others, but you can see in recent years, visual common sense reasoning, multitask language understanding, and competition level mathematics
Hmm.
is gone vertical,
Right.
and approaching human level, if not surpassed it by now.
Right.
I think I saw some data recently actually that showed that that was actually surpassed human baseline.
On the math as well.
Yeah.
It seemed like math would be now that we've got what we've got, that math would be um, in some ways easier because it is so consistent. I mean, there's a lot of language rules that are flexible, as opposed to math rules are pretty inflexible.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. These models are getting really good really quickly at an increasingly faster pace.
Yeah.
Um,
Wow.
so this is something to pay attention to. Once all these things come together, then you've got, AI agents that are pretty capable.
Yes, indeed.
It won't just be reading bedtime stories.
Well, yeah, I'm sure you've seen some of the music that's
Yeah.
been produced over the last few weeks. It's pretty uncanny how they're able. So she could be asking Daddy to sing a song in the using musicals from the 40s as an underlying. Anyway, yeah.
That's right. Here's the article that came with this. AI is doing visual reasoning and math, seriously hard math. And models have gone from scoring less than 10% of the relative performance of humans to more than 90% in just 2 years in competition level math.
Yeah.
So at the bottom of this, I thought this was kind of interesting. The good news for anyone worried about losing their job is that AI researchers are increasingly concerned about running out of high quality data to train their models, with some predicting that available supply will be exhausted by 2026.
Yeah.
And the shortage might force developers to spend increasingly on AI generated or synthetic data for training new models. Adobe's solution is to pay people $3 a minute for videos of them touching things, right? And so here's a little snippet on that. Um, Adobe is pushing its way into the growing business of generative AI video. New tools will roll out this year. Adobe's paying videographers up to $120 for stock footage used to train the model. High priority subjects include footage of people showing emotions. Well, we have plenty of that on the internet. Clips of people touching things. That sounds a little weird, but
Yeah, you're right.
and the anatomy shots of eyes, hands, and feet.
Interesting.
And for AI companies that are wary of copyright lawsuits, this is kind of an interesting way of going about it.
Right, right. I also saw, I don't want to get ahead of you in case you've got this, but I saw a headline which my son was way ahead on when I asked him this question. I think about 6 months ago, I said, "Is this AI thing going to hurt your marketing job?" He's in marketing at a large corporation. He goes, "No." He says, "It will. The jobs that will be in the future in marketing will be those who know how to use AI, who know how to ask the right prompts." And that was the headline just yesterday, saying exactly that.
Yep. There's a great little chart that shows as AI improves what human productivity is going to do, and human productivity is going to go like this.
Right.
And then AI replaces humans, and then human productivity goes like this.
I see. Okay. I've done so many videos on this. I'm not going to repeat them here.
Yeah. Anyway, making complete new transition to something completely different here. California had a milestone. Battery storage became the biggest source of electrical generation supply one evening, April 16th.
Yeah.
That's just 2 days ago.
Wow.
At one point during the sort of the peak time of the evening, battery storage accounted for 24% of supply.
Wow.
So it absorbed all that sun in the daytime,
Yep.
that yellow section, and was able to deliver it to the grid when it was needed
Hmm.
at the peak time. So battery storage is becoming a bigger deal. It takes a while to build out these massive systems, and Tesla
For
is one of
sure.
the suppliers of these systems. And we're now starting to see some of the benefits of that.
Well, and I think the real takeaway here is California is now either the fourth or fifth largest economy in the world. It's really close to Germany and UK and even Japan, I think, at this point in terms of which one is the fourth largest. But let's call it the fifth largest economy in the world. So if the fifth largest economy in the world can have battery supply or battery storage as its number one source, then who can't?
Exactly.
Yep.
Yep. All right. It's time to move to something that's maybe a little less fun to discuss.
Uh-oh.
And if anybody is watching this show and they've got a drink, maybe now it's time to take a sip.
Well, that's again with drama. What you want to do is, my wife is a literature professor, and she tells me, you need to have these hopeless moments so that you can restore hope. So okay,
Right.
I'm ready.
Yeah. And we're going to restore hope at the very end of the show, but
Okay, all
for the
right.
next few minutes, it might feel a little hopeless.
Okay.
Okay. So let's go back to one of our favorite topics, the Fed and inflation. This is a good cartoon here. The Fed trying to throw a dart in the inflation bullseye and missing the target altogether.
What's happened to our British roots? I mean,
Yeah.
if we're Brits, we should be able to hit that target.
Right. No, not even close. We're falling a little bit short.
Yep.
All right. So here's again just looking at inflation by a number of different categories. Motor vehicle maintenance and repair,
Yeah.
year-over-year inflation 8.2%. And we've discussed some of these things before, but this is a little bit different way of presenting some of the data.
Sure, it looks good. I like it.
Hospital services, 7.5% inflation. Owner's equivalent rent. This is how the Fed tries to figure out how much inflation there is in the housing market.
Yep.
It's kind of a weird measure. They ask people what they would rent their homes for, and they get data back, and it's supposed to be reflective of housing inflation.
And I think right now at this exact moment, that 5.9% is probably pretty accurate in terms of year over year on housing pricing.
Yeah, it tends to be a laggy measure.
Right.
And so it's laggy on the upside and laggy on the downside.
Right.
Yeah. Rent to primary residence, there's similar number. Electricity, 5% increase year over year. Food away from home up 4.2%, and then all items 3.5. So if we could just eliminate repairing vehicles, eliminate going to the hospital, eliminate home ownership, then inflation is not a problem.
Yeah, and by the way, you didn't this particular set of information that you pulled from, which I think our friends at Trueflation would do well to post this every day, just like this.
Yes.
That's what they should be doing every single day, so we can see a snapshot.
Yep.
I think you should send that over to them. You can DM them on X. They have an open DM. I would send that over to them. This is what we talked with them on Tuesday morning about on that Spaces. This is one great way they could do it. But you know what's left off on here at the very top? You wouldn't have had room though for it because automobile insurance was up 22%.
That's right. We talked about that last week.
Right.
Yes. Yep. Yeah, it's funny how some things are left off.
Right.
And chocolate prices,
Yes. Right.
which is a big part of my family budget. So it's important.
I know. I get it.
This is also another way to look at it is kind of the contributions to excess inflation.
Uh-huh.
And you can see sort of over time. So if 2.3% is the target or whatever, then what is contributing to pushing that inflation number, the core inflation above that? And you can see the auto insurance, to your point,
Right.
is now in housing. But some of the things that were pushing it above that level in the past now are contributing to actually bringing it down.
Right.
Autos, and so on. So, and perhaps even core services, excluding housing and auto insurance.
Hmm.
So these things can contribute to inflation, I guess, in different ways over time. I think most people understand that's the case, that the inflationary pressure from something can be fairly temporary.
Yeah.
Right now, auto insurance is a pain point,
Yes.
and certainly housing as well. Okay, back to another cartoon. Apparently, inflation wasn't transitory after all, as they're on the sinking ship. Um, yeah, so they're just figuring that out now, I suppose.
Yeah, I have a lot of problems with this particular subject matter. Uh,
Hmm.
Inflation could have been transitory if the government hadn't gotten in the way. And could there maybe have still been transitory issues? Sure, there could have been, but government exacerbated the problem a lot.
Randy, it's the government's job to get in the way. That's
I
that's
so
the role.
absolutely, you're right. What am I thinking?
Yeah. So, all right. Back to your favorite topic of auto insurance.
Yes.
This is since just before the pandemic, 2020, auto insurance took a dip, the purple line,
Hmm.
and it's now cumulatively up 45, 46% since
Yeah.
then,
Yeah.
just before the pandemic, beginning of 2020.
Yeah.
And inflation cumulatively is up about 21.5, 22%.
Right.
So, uh, yeah, it's
So,
been tough. And
so
the last part of those gains have been the last 15 months,
right.
where
So we've reported extensively on this channel that this is primarily due to the boom bust situation that we've just gone through with all the shortages last year, with the price of vehicles going up so much, et cetera, and that takes a couple of years for that to work its way out of the system again in terms of insurance. However, there's also a couple of articles I've read recently that not only Tesla, but other vehicles now have a lot more electronics in them to where a bumper, you get a scratch on your fender, and that fender has electronics under it, and all of a sudden something that looks like it could almost be pulled out by one of those pullers, all of a sudden you're replacing the entire fender for $7,000, $8,000. And then third, you've got a new situation which came into it last night. I just saw the headline, did not read it in detail, is that lawyers, would you think it? Would you think that legal expenses and juries giving big rewards could be a problem for the insurance industry? Well, apparently the insurance companies are citing that as a continuing issue that is also contributing to this 22%.
interesting. Well, if only there was a technology to stop cars from crashing into each other.
What an idea.
Yeah. And maybe even get humans out from behind the wheel.
Right. And if only there was governments that were willing to arrest the crooks that are stealing these cars. Yeah.
Yeah. That's too much to be hopeful for. And then here, so to your point, vehicle maintenance and repair, up 35%
Wow.
since 2020.
Wow.
And you can see a real acceleration there in mid 2022.
Right.
So hopefully things turn on that. And then, by the way, homeowners insurance contributed about almost 1% to CPI last year.
Wow.
So that's which was up 3.4%. So it's a pretty significant chunk in terms of the cost of homeowners insurance.
Now, did you happen to, I don't know if this article talks about it. I mean, primarily this is happening in California and Florida, is my understanding. And it may be due to some again, it may be partially supply chain oriented, partially due to the prices of homes going up so much in those two areas, and both of them are constantly inflicted with in California fires, earthquakes, and wind and other things. Florida, of course, hurricanes. Is the rest of the country also getting hit similarly, or is it kind of isolated?
This article didn't break that down, but you can see in the middle paragraph, it said the increase is in large part due to climate change, which is driving more extreme fires, floods, and storms.
Yeah,
Do
could we spend another hour on that one. I can debunk that.
Well, yeah. But then it goes on to say the US endured a record 28 weather and climate disasters that caused at least $1 billion in damage last year. So 28 times $1 billion, I'm pretty sure is 28 billion.
Yeah.
That's a big number.
Okay, but here again, just as a quick math, you could do this, Cern. I'm sure I'm not teaching you. I'm just saying to everyone else, the reason that there's more climate disasters causing $1 billion worth of damage is because the value of the property that's being damaged is so much higher, and because people are continuing to build their houses in the places where these things happen.
Yeah. Well, Scott Walter. So take it up with him next time he's on your channel.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. He's single-handedly, I think, increasing the cost of insurance here in Sarasota.
Is he building a home in a hurricane prone neighborhood?
That's right.
Okay.
Yep. All right. And then last but not least, this is kind of interesting. Health insurance. So according to the government, the cost of health insurance in the US declined by 15% over the last year.
Wow.
So if you want some good news in CPI, I guess here it is. But it's kind of interesting how they calculate this. They look at
Yeah.
changes in retained earnings of the health insurers.
Yeah.
So is that reflective of the premiums that you and I pay and the true costs that we have? Maybe not.
Yeah.
I guess the thinking here is that the whole industry collectively, makes and loses money, therefore tracking that as the way to measure the cost of insurance over time. But it sure seems a little weird.
And they also made a change in the way that they do this analysis at the end of last year. So starting in January of this year, you see this ticking back up again. And that's because there's almost an automatic 1% increase in healthcare insurance costs this year because of the change in the way that they're doing the analysis.
Yep. So strange things on insurance and how it relates to CPI.
Right.
Okay. Well, are we ready to leave inflation behind?
We're ready to leave inflation behind in general and specifically, yes.
Okay. Let's now move on to the segment where we bash on a few people. This is a survey from Bank of America. I believe it was at the end of last year, so it's only 4 months old. And 62% of the people they surveyed said that they expected bond yields to fall. Okay.
Yeah.
And that's this blue line. They're tracking it over time. So this is a survey that they do over time, and that was pretty much at high levels for the highest level in the last 20 years.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's pretty close to a sure thing, right, Randy?
Pretty close.
So how do they do? Well, not so well. This is the year-to-date total return for the Bloomberg 30-year bond bond index, a 30-year bond, and the total return is down about 10%, which means interest rates went up.
Yeah.
And it's among, it's getting close to the worst return at this point during the year. There's a couple of years, 2022 was one such year where the return was even worse than this.
Right.
But there are not too many years where the return in the bond market for the first 4 months of the year was worse than minus 9.8%.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow.
Okay. And then here's a similar chart for the global aggregate bond index, down about 4.25%. And you can see it's the second worst. The previous worst was, again, 2022,
Right.
where at this point it was down about 10% and finished the year down 16. So anyway, just be careful when you pay attention to these surveys from Bank of America and what these experts say.
And in terms of projecting, I could right now project, I think it's not going to do much better the rest of the year, but maybe that'll be the thing it needs to turn around. Just my projection.
We shall see. That's right. If you're making that projection public, then I think that may be helpful. And then here's another one, record 89% expected lower short-term rates.
Yeah.
And this was, I guess this is global CPI versus short-term rates. They're comparing that to, they were expecting, near 90% expected lower CPI. Sorry, about 80%.
So, Cern, you're a financial advisor. You're like on another level from the rest of us in terms of making these kind of predictions and projections, because you actually advise other people what to do with their money. Do you have a rule like I do that if 89% of the people think one way, you would probably be better to bet the other way?
Yeah, as long as it's more than 87%, then that's a safe
I see.
assumption. Yeah, it has to be over 87%, Randy.
87%. Okay.
Yeah, no, just all humor aside, we really pay no attention to these kinds of projections. We try to think independently about these things,
Okay. Okay.
and really try not to factor in too much short-term stuff because in the end, it's all noise.
Uh-huh.
And you can chase your tail, uh, monitoring and tracking and thinking about all the stuff, and in the end, it doesn't really matter for most people.
Right.
Okay. Interest rates. So the 10-year yield now is the highest since it's been since November of last year,
Right.
when interest rates kind of peaked and then came back down on the hopes of Fed rate cuts. And right now we're up to 4.6% on the 10-year again.
Right.
And the real 10-year rate, if you factor in inflation,
Okay.
is now about 2.2%, which again is the highest since last November.
Right.
So we're in this phase now where we all expected the Fed would cut. We got excited about that, and now those expectations are gradually fading away
Right.
as the economy has proven stronger than many thought.
Right.
Speaking of interest rates, even though the effective federal funds rate is, over 5%, the national average rate on savings accounts is 0.5%. So a word to the wise here, don't just assume that you're getting a nice high rate of interest on your savings. You need to look and see, and if it is so low, then you can take some action to move it to a place where your money is better treated.
And that is investment advice.
Well, not
Oh,
specific investment advice, just general advice
general
on
investment advice.
maximizing your savings interest rate. Yep. Okay. This is kind of a crazy chart of a bunch of colors, a bunch of lines. What are they? Well, it's the expectations for Fed rate cuts
Oh,
for the European Central Bank in blue, the Fed in orange, the Bank of Canada in purple, and the Swiss National Bank in green. And you can see the Federal Reserve banks, central banks around the world are kind of pack animals. They tend to move in unison. And right now, the US seems to be the one that's a little bit out of step, as expectations for rate cuts in the US have greatly diminished. But expectations for rate cuts in Canada, Switzerland, and Europe in general are still pretty high. This is
yeah.
for June.
Yeah.
So we now have less than 20% expectation that the Fed will cut rates in June, whereas in other areas it's over 70%.
And it's interesting too, because to the extent that they cut their rates, it will drive up the value of the dollar.
Right.
Which right now the dollar is at huge highs compared to their currencies.
The dollar may strengthen in the short term if those central banks cut rates and we don't.
Right.
It would strengthen the dollar. Yeah. So, it's not just in isolation. Any action that the Fed does or doesn't take also impacts the competitiveness of exports, for example.
Yes.
If our dollar strengthens, then exports become more expensive,
Yep.
and therefore less attractive. It would help though imports, so the consumers buying things from China, for example, would get
Right.
better deal.
Yep.
Um,
Better
so
international travel for us.
yep, that's right. And hold that thought. That is something
Oh,
we're going to talk about.
all right. Okay.
Yeah. This is kind of interesting. What are the interest rates that companies pay on
Hmm.
their debt? And of course, it's probably no great surprise, but if you are a large company, the interest rate you pay in your debt is going to be lower
Sure.
than if you are a smallest company. But the interesting thing is that small companies have seen a massive spike
Wow.
in the effective rate that they pay. So the smallest 50% of companies in the S&P 1500, which is the S&P 500 plus the mid caps plus the small caps,
Mm,
1,500 firms, the smallest half of those have seen a big spike in their interest rates from 4.2% up to close to 6%.
right.
Whereas the big companies have maybe gone from 3 to maybe close to 3.5%.
Right. Right.
They've been much less impacted by rising rates than small companies have.
Mm, yeah.
Um, so I thought that was an interesting chart. And again, this data is tracked over time, and you can see that the large companies tend to have a smoother change.
Yeah.
in
And
their-
again, let's make sure that it's clear to the people watching that the smallest 50%, these are not small companies. These
Right.
would even be under the 500. They wouldn't be the 500 employee level even. I don't think. Are there any S&P companies that there might be a few financials and whatnot that are under 500 employees,
Oh, I
but
doubt it.
yeah, maybe not even the financials. Yeah. So probably all of these are bigger than than what the federal government considers a small business, which
Oh,
is
yeah.
500 employees. Yeah.
Yeah. Many small cap companies are still pretty sizable
Right.
businesses.
Right.
Yeah. So anyway, that was an interesting chart.
Yeah.
It creates a little bit of pain, perhaps, if you're wondering perhaps why small caps are not doing so well. This could be one reason that
Yeah.
their interest costs have gone up a lot.
Right.
A lot of smaller companies do have a lot of debt, so that this does hurt them.
Yeah.
For those that are short-term minded, this is disaster. The S&P now has moved below its 50-day moving average,
Yeah.
right? And so I'm saying this a little facetiously because I don't really worry about these kinds of things,
You're not
right?
you're not that interested in the technical, huh?
Not so interested in the technical, but let me give you some perspective on that. If you look out then for the next 1 month, 3, 6, 1 year, 3 year, and 5 year periods,
Uh-huh.
what does this mean? Well, you can see in the next month, there is a smattering of green and a smattering of red.
Mm-hmm.
The red means that the market went down. The green means the market went up. So on average, you could say when the S&P crosses that 50-day moving average to the downside, is there a 50-50 chance the market goes up or down? Maybe.
Mm-hmm.
3 months, 6 months, more greens creeping in. 1 year, it's maybe pretty even still, but 3 and 5 years, mostly green.
Gotcha.
So my message is, if you're not inclined to think short term, don't. Focus on 3 and 5 years or even beyond, and you can ignore the noise of 50-day moving averages and all that stuff.
Okay. Yes,
But even in the short term, I'm not sure that you can glean much information from the fact that it's crossed that 50-day moving average line.
right. By the way, though, Cern, so you can add it to your information about the channel, we have just this last week, not quite predicted, but indicated an inclination to think that we might be looking at a 10% correction right now.
That would be my expectation any time.
Yeah.
That's a part and parcel of investing.
Right.
Yeah, don't need to predict that. It's coming any day. And you should expect it. If it's a surprise to you, then you don't understand the nature
How
of
markets
investing.
work. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Let's move on to something kind of fun, but not so much if you own the stock. A theme in this show, I think, is the effect of the pandemic and how it's lingered. Now, Zoom was
Which
a company that we all
recording on it.
discovered very quickly during the pandemic,
Yeah.
and its stock really zoomed, but it's
Yeah.
now zoomed the other way, and it's now down 90% from its peak.
Well, I think that's because the CEO is spending too much time on other things. I think it's also because the board of directors of that company have not been paying attention. Don't you think that those are all true?
Probably not advertising enough.
Not advertising enough. That has to be it.
Yeah. So let's go beyond this chart though and say, okay, well, how's their business done?
Yeah.
Okay. So if we look at their revenues, they've
Right.
actually had a 10x increase in revenue,
Right.
quarterly revenue to now 1.1 billion a quarter.
Okay.
Okay. So fundamentally, you would say the company is growing pretty nicely. The problem is that its price to sales ratio, and this is just one metric we could look at,
Yeah,
it's gone from 124 to 4.
or,
So I guess expectations were for much higher revenue growth than just 10x.
yes,
10x has not been enough to overcome
no,
the decline in the price to sales ratio.
right.
So this will be an interesting one to watch over the years. And companies like Peloton and other pandemic favorites, suffer a similar kind of fate.
Well, Peloton, and I'm always getting confused. Peloton's the one that does the exercise bikes.
Mhm.
Yes, I predicted it. It was such an easy prediction. I've been in that industry my entire life. And it's going to swing with these kind of issues.
Yeah.
People tend to park their exercise bike in their garage or their closet after using it for a few days. And so this one has been a little bit better than the average exercise piece of equipment, but not that much.
Yeah, we're all still using Zoom. We're using Zoom right now.
Right.
So fundamental technology that's been great. It's been very helpful, but the expectations certainly got ahead of the company and what they
Yes.
delivered, but the company's delivered nicely. It's a 10x increase in revenues. Not many companies can say that in 4 years,
No, no.
right? But it wasn't enough. And this is a similar fate that Cisco Systems had back
Sure.
in the dot-com era.
Sure.
Expectations got so high, the company fundamentally did really well, but just not well enough to overcome
Exactly.
the high valuation.
Yes.
Okay. Speaking of pandemic, um, this is the percentage of city office space currently in use.
Okay.
So something happened back there in 2020. I don't remember what it was, but we all decided that we'd go work from home.
Yeah.
And a lot of people didn't go back. But over time, you can see that it's trending back.
Right.
But the number one city, which I guess on this list might be Austin or Chicago, I can't tell which blue is which, is not even at 70% of where they were.
Mm,
And some of these cities are below 50 still.
right. Wow.
So that's interesting. I wonder how long it'll take, if ever, to get back to that 100% line.
Yeah. Huh. It'll probably depend a lot on whether companies are able to measure correctly the productivity of those home workers. And they've been doing it now for, as you just pointed out, since 2020, it's been a thing. So that's 3 years and a few months of data that they should be getting a pretty good idea about that productivity.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it depends on the market dynamics for labor,
Right.
that kind of a thing too.
Sure.
So yeah, it'll be interesting to track this over time.
Mhm.
Um, okay. So one of the consequences from this, and this is from Jim Bianco, he sort of said, well, okay, we're all cooped up in our homes,
Mhm.
and that's all great. But at some point, it creates a pent-up in demand to travel.
Ah,
Right? You get tired of looking at the same four walls. And this is an interesting chart that shows the percentage of the country planning on a foreign country vacation in the next 6 months.
wow.
And we're pretty much at record highs on this.
Wow. Like a doubling from the pre-pandemic numbers.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now that
So
obviously could be partially because the cost of doing so is so low,
that would help.
right? It could be the aging of the population. I mean, in that 4 years, oh, this goes back to, yeah, okay, I'm sorry. So yeah, I was looking at the wrong thing. So you could see this, it was starting to increase dramatically starting in 2011. It
Yeah.
was already starting to go up quite nicely. So I'm going to guess this has a lot to do with the aging of the population, as people are taking, and these cruise ships are getting to be the size of major cities. Uh, so yeah, interesting, but really quite a spike this year.
Yeah. And actually, I went to a foreign country this past weekend.
You did,
Yeah, I was in Tampa,
yeah.
but that's not the joke. Um, and there's a little piece of land that's owned by Cuba there.
Oh, I see.
And
I see.
technically, I guess it's not Cuban territory, but technically it is owned by Cuba,
That's-
so kind of Cuban territory. So
There you
yeah,
go.
a
There you
surveyed me. I guess I wasn't planning on it, but I did go to a foreign country.
go. All right.
Okay, it's quiz time, Randy. Speaking of travel, here's a list of the 10 busiest airports in the world,
In the world,
and I have shaded the top three.
I see.
And I want you to tell me what the top three are in order.
In the world, in order. And you're taking Los Angeles and Chicago off the table.
Well, they're in the top 10,
Oh, I
74
know, I know.
million
I'm
passengers a
looking here.
year.
Yeah, I'm looking, you've taken those off the table. And so, what you haven't taken off the table is, what do you call it? Georgia, Atlanta, you haven't taken off the table. You haven't taken, Dallas off the table. And Paris, you haven't taken Paris. I'm going to go with those three.
You've got 2 out of 3 correct.
There you go.
You know which one you got wrong?
Paris.
Yes. Dubai. Dubai is number 2.
Dubai
Atlanta's number
is
1.
number 2.
Atlanta number 1, 105 million passengers a year.
Yeah.
And I travel through there frequently, and
Oh, yeah.
I've seen all 105 million people.
Yeah.
Dubai is a busy airport, 87 million a year, and then Dallas Fort Worth, 82 million.
It's the hub and spoke. That's what's
Yep.
on this. It's not because everybody's going to Atlanta to
Right.
visit Atlanta. It's the hub and spoke. Dallas, of course, that area has become four of the top 10 largest cities in the country are now in Texas. So part of this Dallas thing is because of Texas, but basically it's United's hub, right?
I believe Delta is Atlanta's hub.
Atlanta. Yeah,
Yeah.
right. And also Dubai is a hub. And
Yep.
then I'm a little surprised at Paris, although I guess maybe it's not a hub. Paris still claims to be the most visited city in the world.
Well, maybe actually people stepping into the city,
Yes,
its airport is not the most visited airport in the world.
right.
Yep. So back to an earlier theme, retirement. So I'm sad to announce the retirement of Atlas.
Yeah.
That was a couple days ago. And if you haven't seen it, the Boston Dynamics video, it's about 3 minutes showing some of Atlas highlights and lowlights.
Right, right.
There's one scene where he falls down and actually the hydraulic fluid spews from his broken leg.
His wires are pouring out.
Yeah, it's quite brutal to watch. But Atlas was a pioneer.
Yep.
But Atlas is not built for what we need in this new generation of robots. But we didn't have to suffer the demise of Atlas very long, because the very next day they announced new Atlas.
Right.
And it's an interesting design. And they appear to have copied the way that Figure has designed their robot, and Scott Walter pointed this out this morning on X.
Hmm.
And CEO of Figure, Brett Adcock, chimed in on that as well. He doesn't sound too pleased
Oh, really?
with the theft of their design.
I see.
So
Which part did they just kind of the general shape or
the waist, the hinged waist.
the hinged waist?
Yep.
I see.
But if you haven't seen the video on this one, the way this robot gets off the floor is rather interesting.
Yes, definitely.
So there's a couple of videos to watch. If people haven't seen that, I encourage you to see those. They're both very short.
Yeah, yesterday, in fact, we'll put up a card. Scott Walter and I did a video on this yesterday morning. And we do show both the old video and the new video as part of that video. So highly encourage people to go check it, take a look at that.
Absolutely. Yep. Scott is the expert in this stuff. And then I'm not sure if you saw this new bot, but Mentee Robotics out of Israel, the CEO of Mobileye there in the center, is one of the founders. And this robot is kind of interesting. I'm not sure if you've seen the videos, but It can take commands, voice commands. You can ask it to do something, and then in this video, it shows you on the screen what the robot is thinking.
Yeah.
The user requested me to go to the table in the kitchen. First, I need to find it in the map and then navigate to it. And then that's the think mode, and then it speaks. It says, okay, I will go to the table in the kitchen, and then it starts walking away. And then it says, locate table in the kitchen. Result, position 0, navigate to position 0. And the video shows the robot navigating there, and then the robot's given another command. He's asked to put the fruits in a container and move the container to a shelf. And so you see what it's thinking. All the fruits are now in the container. Now I need to lift the container. Lift, container, position 4. So it's kind of interesting. We're seeing this more and more, the ability to just communicate to the robot, just ask it what you want to do. It understands human language. You
Right.
can see the thought process. It's pretty amazing. So we've added this robot to our list.
I think this particular robot does, however, win the prize for the ugliest robot so far. Yeah.
Yeah, the headless design is an interesting choice.
Yes.
Um,
Just kind of
that-
the overall everything just all looks so industrial and wrong.
yeah. And I think it's important to understand, though, at this point, when they're developing robots, that
Sure.
that the end aesthetic can come later,
Yes, I understand.
right? And no doubt there'll be all kinds of refinements. They probably don't have too many designers on their staff yet, right?
Maybe that's it.
Yeah. So it's interesting. It's, another addition to the list. And we now, as I mentioned, we have 26.
Yeah.
And there's another Chinese company I'll be adding to the list in the next week.
Oh, okay.
Waiting for their videos to become public so that I can talk about them.
Okay.
And they already have a partnership with an auto company. So there's lots of things happening in this list here in the US, in Europe, Israel, China. It's a very dynamic space for
Yes,
sure.
and of course, an interesting part about the Atlas revision is that, of course, they are owned by Hyundai. And Hyundai and Kia are basically the same company. So we should certainly, I think, be hearing about Atlas in some way being deployed there.
They have indicated as much, that they said that there would be initial testing or something, commercial deployment with Hyundai next year.
Okay, all right,
Yep.
there you go. All right, so 2025 looks to be the year of the deployment of robots in a wide scale.
Yes, that last column that right now is blank. We expect to be adding quite a few data points there.
Okay.
Now, let me also address the topic a lot of people ask about is, have we ranked the companies?
Yes.
And I think I maintain that it's too early to rank anybody yet. And I think that once companies start deploying, then maybe we might attempt to do that and use the deployment as an initial ranking tool. But it's very hard right now to rank companies based on capabilities and so on. We're tracking milestones. And if they say that they have a large language model and integration with voice, and we see a video, then we can add them to this list. But obviously there's some nuance to that.
Sure.
It may not be so easy as just turning that feature on.
Right.
Right. And so over time, I think it'll become clearer, become easier, more obvious in terms of how we would rank these companies. But for now, we're just including everybody on the list. There is no particular rank order. I get a lot of flack from Tesla fans putting Tesla at number 2. Don't read anything into that. I'm just having fun with you by doing that. And so on. So, but anyway, this is a very interesting space. This list is now very quickly growing beyond just one page.
Right.
So we may refine it at some point and make it a bit more readable and maybe a couple of pages.
Okay. Very nice. Very good.
Somebody asked me recently, how many bots do I think will be on this list next year? And my answer is 37.
37. I see. Not 38, but 37. Okay.
37.
Okay. All right.
It's
This year,
virtual
sometime.
certainty.
Okay.
Yeah. So with that, Randy, that brings us to the end of our random walk down Wall Street and the markets and the bot world.
Okay, well, that is, as always, fascinating. Maybe I might go so far as to say I think that was the one where I learned the most. I think of all the ones you've done so far, there was more things that now there were things that were so new. There was so much of it was you must have done this morning.
I have to stay one step ahead of you because you're such a smart guy. It's going to be hard for me to teach you anything that you don't know already. So that's my only trick now is to use some time arbitrage, just to get ahead of the game and get information that was just made available 2 seconds before we start recording this.
Yeah, yeah. There's smart and there is informed. And you don't have to be smart to be informed. So I think I should do it sometime. Maybe we'll have you do a chart on it as to how many headlines and how many articles I see a day. I don't think there's any way that a human being could possibly take in more headlines or articles than I do in a single day. Unless you weren't doing anything with them. I suppose if that's all you did and you never actually analyzed them, wrote about them, regurgitated them, or did anything useful with them. But yeah, it's absolutely incredible. So yeah, staying ahead of my knowledge base, if you will, is certainly, I think, not, with no bragging intended, just pure fact of doing the exercise. So yeah, so great. No, I really liked it. Really enjoyed it. And yeah, I will look forward to the next episode.
And I look forward to when Scott brings some beautiful charts and slides to your show. Is that too much to hope for?
Yeah, that's way too much to hope for.
Okay, well,
Yes.
I keep hoping.
I don't think he'll bring you some animations that are pretty clever.
Yeah.
Animations. Yes, those are actually quite good.
Yep.
That's
Agreed.
the only slightly, chiding thing that you've said about Scott the entire time.
Well, Scott and I had 7 hours in the car together a week ago.
Yeah,
And so we buried the hatchet. We agreed to play nice.
I see. That would happen. Okay, all right, great. Cern, as always, thank you for coming on and sharing, and it's been great. And to all of you out there, hey, it's been great talking to you.
Thanks, Randy.